What really happened in the Diddy trial? Celebrity justice uncovered. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you are watching from in the comment. It started with whispers, just a few online rumors dismissed as noise. Sean Diddy Combs, the man behind Bad Boy Records, the mogul who brought Biggie to the world, was too powerful, too respected, too untouchable. But in late 2024, the whispers turned into headlines. Then came the sirens. Paparazzi swarmed as federal agents descended on Combs' LA mansion. It looked like a scene from a crime thriller. Black SUVs, tactical vests, evidence boxes. The world watched, stunned, as Diddy, the man who had once danced in platinum videos with champagne in hand, was led away in cuffs. The allegations were shocking. Sex trafficking, kidnapping, assault, conspiracy. A grand jury had approved multiple charges. It wasn't just tabloid fodder anymore. It was real, and it was public. His fans were divided. Some screamed setup. Others whispered that it had been a long time coming. But no one could ignore the storm brewing. Diddy had fallen. The indictment was nearly 50 pages long. It read like a horror script. Multiple victims. Claims spanning over 2 decades. Allegations that Combs had built an empire not just on music but manipulation. Prosecutors alleged that he used drugs, fame, and fear to control people. That he lured young women with promises of fame, only to isolate and abuse them. That he surrounded himself with enablers, people who looked the other way or worse, helped. The most damning evidence? A black leather folder marked private. Inside were signed NDAs, payment records, flight logs, even photographs. But the centerpiece was the testimony of 4 women. Jane does 1 through 4, who told eerily similar stories. Different years. Same pattern. One said, "He told me I belonged to him. That no one would believe me." Another said, "I tried to leave. He said he'd ruin me." There was a chill in the courtroom when the judge read their statements. Even seasoned journalists said they hadn't heard anything like it before. Diddy's legal team came out swinging. They called the case a media-fueled witch hunt. His lead attorney, Michael Stern, said, "My client is innocent. These are false accusations designed to extort money from a public figure." But prosecutors pushed back. They had more than testimonies. They had video evidence. Private jets tracked through flight data. Text messages recovered from old iPhones. A pattern of payouts and non-disclosure agreements that formed a web too big to ignore. The defense tried to suppress the evidence. Motions flew. News anchors dissected every filing. Diddy's PR team launched a counteroffensive, interviews, social media campaigns, old friends giving character references. But the weight of the case grew heavier by the day. Then came the leaks. A former assistant went public. Her NDA had expired. She described parties that turned into nightmares. Girls brought in from out of state. Security guards ordered to lock doors. "Everyone knew," she said, but no one dared to speak. The internet exploded. Reddit threads analyzed timelines. TikTokers broke down court documents. Hashtags like #DiddyTrial and #Justice for the Victims trended for days. Public opinion shifted. Brands began to pull partnerships. Spotify removed Diddy's promotional content. Music awards quietly distanced themselves. He was no longer the hero of hip-hop. He was the villain in a story America couldn't look away from. Then came the audio file. Leaked anonymously to a journalist, it featured Diddy's voice. Slurred, angry, threatening. It hadn't been verified, but it sounded damning. Social media turned it viral in minutes. The court ordered an investigation into the leak, but the damage was done. Commentators began comparing the case to Weinstein, to Epstein, to Cosby, another titan of entertainment, now toppled by decades of silence finally broken. In jail, Diddy's requests for bail were denied. The judge cited risk of flight and witness intimidation. He sat alone in a high-security holding facility, far from the penthouses and private jets. Those close to him said he was quiet, focused, still convinced he'd walk free. But the world outside was preparing for the trial of the decade. A-list witnesses were subpoenaed. Victims prepared to testify. The Department of Justice called the case a reckoning. And in the shadows, more accusers were coming forward. The fall of a mogul was just the beginning. The courtroom doors hadn't even opened yet. And already, the empire was crumbling. In a sleek Manhattan apartment on the 45th floor, the curtains were always drawn. Sunlight rarely touched the marble floors or glimmered on the gold-accented furniture. Behind those blackout drapes, Sean Diddy Combs lived a double life. To the outside world, he was a mogul, a philanthropist, a kingmaker. But behind closed doors, a much darker version of Diddy emerged. It wasn't just an image shift. It was a psychological transformation. Former staff began to speak out. Drivers, housekeepers, assistants. Each offered fragments of a disturbing puzzle. You could feel the tension the moment you stepped inside, one housekeeper said. Everyone walked on eggshells. One mistake and you were gone. According to reports, Diddy's inner circle operated like a fortress. Phones were banned. Every staff member signed airtight non-disclosure agreements. Security cameras lined the hallways. Rooms were soundproofed. Guests had to surrender personal items upon entry. What was he hiding? According to testimony, more than anyone imagined. Jane Doe number 2, an aspiring model from Atlanta, shared chilling memories. She had met Diddy at a VIP event in 2017. Charmed by his charisma and promises of stardom, she agreed to meet him again. What followed was a whirlwind. Private jets, luxury suites, shopping sprees. But soon it turned sinister. She described a pattern of control. Phones confiscated, chaperoned outings, emotional isolation. He broke me down, she said, voice trembling in court. Told me I was nothing without him, that no one would believe a girl like me. She wasn't alone. A former personal chef described after-hours parties, where guests were handpicked and phones were sealed in bags. Liquor flowed, drugs were freely available, and the rules were simple. Diddy was always in control. He allegedly chose who stayed, who left, who went upstairs. Sometimes, girls didn't reappear until morning. Behind closed doors, the charismatic producer became paranoid and cruel. Court documents cited instances where he screamed at staff over missing shoes, fired people mid-flight, and threw objects in rage. One security officer, hired through a private firm, said, "It wasn't a home, it was a bunker." The homes weren't just lavish, they were fortified. Bulletproof glass, panic rooms, armed guards, rooms with electronic locks that only Diddy could control. Jane Doe number 3 recounted being locked in for 36 hours after she disrespected him by not answering a text. She cried. She screamed. No one came. Later, she was handed a designer bag and $10,000 in cash. "Don't tell anyone," he whispered. "This never happened." Another assistant described a hierarchy inside the homes. There were favored girls. They got gifts, traveled with him. Others, those who resisted, were frozen out or coerced. He allegedly used shame, threats, and drugs as tools of manipulation. One chilling moment recounted in court involved a party in Miami. A young woman passed out in a guest room. When a housekeeper tried to check on her, a bodyguard stopped her. "She's fine," he said. "Boss says don't go in." The housekeeper quit the next day. The court subpoenaed home surveillance footage. Though much of it had been deleted, investigators recovered backups from cloud storage. One video reportedly showed a confrontation between Diddy and a woman in his penthouse. Her voice trembled. His voice was raised. She begged to leave. He slammed the door shut. When prosecutors played the clip in court, audible gasps filled the room. This was not just about power, the DA said. This was about imprisonment, control, fear. Psychologists brought in by the prosecution painted a damning portrait. "This is classic coercive control," Dr. Helena Moore explained. "A cycle of manipulation, intimidation, and reward." He made himself the center of their world and their jailer. The defense objected, claiming speculative analysis. But the court allowed it. By this time, 3 more alleged victims had come forward. One had been just 19. Diddy's homes, once the symbol of opulence, became symbols of fear. One investigator described them as soundproof palaces. And perhaps the most disturbing discovery was a locked basement room in the Los Angeles estate. No windows, padded walls, a single mattress. Authorities found ropes, zip ties, and a small black box with multiple USB drives. Those drives contained hours of footage, not music videos, recordings of people, often under the influence, being berated, humiliated, and sometimes worse. The court sealed the contents to protect the victims. But rumors swirled. This wasn't just misconduct, a journalist said on CNN. This was psychological warfare. Meanwhile, Diddy remained calm, smirking at times in court, dressed impeccably, confident. He thinks he's untouchable, one victim's advocate said, but the evidence said otherwise. Behind the platinum records and perfume ads was a man running what prosecutors now called a celebrity cult, complete with mind games, silence, and submission. Chapter 2 ends not with a bang, but a whisper from the past. One of the earliest victims, now a mother of two, took the stand. She looked Diddy in the eye and said, "You once told me no one would ever hear my voice, but here I am, and you're listening." For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. The courtroom wasn't built for a media storm, but the moment Sean Diddy Combs stepped through the doors, flanked by attorneys and security, it turned into a stage. Dozens of reporters lined the marble halls. Flashbulbs popped. News choppers hovered above. It was the most anticipated trial in recent celebrity history. The stakes weren't just legal, they were cultural. Everyone was watching. Inside, the room was tense. Rows of seats filled with journalists, activists, fans, and curious onlookers. Victims' advocates clutched notes. Tabloid photographers disguised as students sat in the back, scribbling details. Armed U.S. Marshals flanked every exit. The presiding judge, Marisol Pena, was no stranger to high-profile cases. But even she admitted, off-record, this trial had more heat than anything she'd seen. "It's not just a criminal case," one attorney whispered. "It's a reckoning." Opening statements began on a Monday morning. The prosecution came out strong. "This case is about abuse of power," Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Kim declared. "It is about manipulation, fear, and celebrity being used as a shield. But no more." Her voice didn't tremble. She laid out the timeline. The parties, the victims, the silencing tactics, and the psychological domination. It wasn't about fame, she said. It was about control. Then came the defense. Michael Stern was a seasoned celebrity litigator. Immaculate suit, calm delivery. "What the prosecution has presented," he began, "is a fiction. A carefully crafted narrative designed to destroy a man's legacy." He called the victims opportunists, the evidence circumstantial, the charges sensationalized. "Diddy is not a saint," Stern said, "but he is not a monster." The room shifted. As testimony began, the courtroom transformed into a psychological battlefield. Jane Doe number 1 walked in wearing a gray suit. No makeup, no jewelry. Her voice, though quiet, was unshakable. She described a night in 2015 when she says Diddy drugged her. "I woke up, and I wasn't where I had fallen asleep," she said. The room froze. Her testimony went on for 2 hours. The cross-examination was brutal. Stern questioned her memory, her timeline, her motives. "You filed a civil suit, didn't you?" he asked. "I did," she said. "For money, for justice." Gasps. Silence. Then quiet applause, immediately hushed by the bailiff. Each day brought a new headline. Day 4. An ex-bodyguard testified Diddy ordered surveillance on women who tried to leave his inner circle. Day 6. A former producer described paying hush money to keep reputations intact. Day 8. An anonymous witness, voice disguised, described secret rooms in his Miami estate used for what she called discipline. The jury watched it all. Eyes forward. No expressions. One juror later told a journalist, "We felt like we were being pulled into a movie. But it wasn't fiction. The defense began calling character witnesses, musicians, executives, celebrities. "He gave me my first break," said one hip-hop artist. "He donated millions to underserved schools," said a former business partner. But the prosecution pounced. "Did you ever live in his home? No. Were you ever alone with him during these alleged events? No." Their credibility cracked. Diddy's team presented a counter-narrative. That the accusers were bitter, that they banded together, that this was all a well-orchestrated takedown. They brought in a digital forensics expert who questioned the validity of the video evidence. But the prosecution countered with metadata, chain of custody logs, time-stamped records. In the end, digital footprints don't lie. Then came the bombshell. A woman, previously unnamed in court filings, stepped forward. Jane Doe number 5. She had refused to testify but changed her mind after seeing media coverage. She claimed Diddy had coerced her into an NDA after a violent encounter in 2013. "I was scared. He said he had people everywhere." She turned over a signed agreement and a secret recording. In the audio, Diddy's voice was unmistakable. "You talk, you disappear," he said. The courtroom went still. The judge ordered an immediate recess. Outside, news outlets exploded. Diddy threat tape shocks courtroom. New witness changes everything. Hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag Diddy on trial. Hashtag celebrity justice. Hashtag believe her. After weeks of testimony, the jury looked weary. The courtroom looked bruised. Both sides had fought hard. But one image remained. A woman sitting on the stand, eyes locked on the man who once held her world in his hands, saying, "You can't silence everyone. Not forever." When the courtroom doors shut behind the final witness, the world didn't quiet down. It erupted. Across cable news, social media, blogs, and podcasts, the Diddy trial consumed every headline. But away from the media frenzy, the real impact played out in the lives of those who had testified. The victims had spoken, and now they had to face the consequences of their truth. For Jane Doe number 1, life after the trial was a minefield. She had been praised by some and vilified by others. Online trolls called her a liar, an opportunist, a gold digger. But support came too. Survivor networks reached out. Women's rights attorneys offered protection. She began therapy, trying to rebuild what Diddy had broken. "I feel like I finally have a voice," she told Rolling Stone. "But some nights, I still wake up shaking." Her story was now etched into the public narrative. But the emotional wounds remained private and raw. Other survivors began to come forward, not for the courtroom but for closure. A former makeup artist, a freelance photographer, a stylist, all women, all with eerily similar stories. They described encounters that never made it to the witness stand. Some were too afraid. Some were bound by still active NDAs. Others simply didn't want to relive the past. Still, their accounts began circulating online. One detailed a party in Paris where she was drugged. Another claimed Diddy ruined her career when she refused his advances. A third posted a cryptic tweet. "Some of us escaped. Some didn't." The tweet was shared 140,000 times. Meanwhile, Diddy's empire began to crack. Endorsement deals were dropped. Partnerships dissolved. His fashion brand saw a sharp decline in sales. Ciroc, the vodka brand he had championed, announced they were reviewing the relationship. Music streaming platforms quietly de-emphasized his playlists. TV networks canceled appearances. Documentary projects were put on indefinite hold. And yet, some fans remained loyal. "Separate the art from the artist," they tweeted. "He's innocent until proven guilty." But public sentiment had shifted. Even without a verdict, the court of public opinion had delivered its judgment. Back inside the courtroom, the jury deliberated for days. The pressure was immense, the evidence complex, the testimonies emotional. Some jurors later said they felt haunted by what they'd heard. One described losing sleep. Another mentioned crying during breaks. They weren't just deciding guilt. They were defining the limits of fame. When they returned with a partial verdict, guilty on 2 counts, hung on others, the courtroom was dead silent. Diddy showed no emotion. But outside, a woman sobbed in the hallway. It was Jane Doe number 3. "He's not invincible," she said. "Not anymore." The sentencing phase was set for the following month. Meanwhile, the stories kept coming. #JusticeForHer trended worldwide. A Netflix producer announced a documentary series in development. A book publisher signed a multi-victim memoir. Hollywood had turned its lens toward the Diddy trial, and now everyone wanted in. But for the survivors, fame wasn't the goal. Accountability was. Activists took to the streets. Posters of Diddy with the word predator went viral. Protesters gathered outside recording studios and industry award shows. In one chilling moment, a survivor interrupted a live radio broadcast. "He heard us, and you gave him a stage." The host froze. The line went dead, but the message had already spread. Even longtime friends distanced themselves. Collaborators issued public statements. One said, "I didn't know. I should have." Another, "This industry protects too many for too long." The silence around Diddy wasn't loyalty, it was fear. And now that silence had been broken. In court, victim impact statements began. One by one, women approached the stand. Their hands trembled, but their voices didn't. "You made me feel worthless," said Jane Doe number 4. "But I found worth in speaking." Another, "You don't own my story anymore." Each testimony peeled back another layer of the illusion. Diddy wasn't a legend. He was a man facing the truth. One of the most powerful moments came from the mother of a former employee. "She came home one night sobbing," the mother said. "She never told me what happened, and now I know." The courtroom wept. Even the judge had to pause to regain composure. Social media reacted with heartbreak and fury. "You mean to tell me we danced to his music while this was happening?" One tweet read. "It's not cancel culture. It's consequences," said another. Podcasts analyzed every detail. Think pieces exploded. Universities held panels on celebrity, power, and abuse. The trial had become more than a legal case. It was a cultural reckoning. Backstage, behind all the headlines and hashtags, the survivors tried to move on. Some changed their names. Others moved cities. One began working with trauma survivors in shelters. Another launched a podcast about healing. They were reclaiming their lives, one step, one story, one breath at a time. And through it all, Diddy maintained his innocence. He released a statement. "I have never harmed anyone. This is a witch hunt. The truth will come out." But for many, the truth already had. And it wasn't in his words. It was in theirs. The day of sentencing arrived cloaked in anxiety. Outside the courthouse, camera crews jostled for space. Inside, the energy was electric, tight like a pulled string ready to snap. Diddy entered the courtroom wearing a charcoal gray suit. His face was unreadable. Not cold, not warm, just unreadable. His legal team surrounded him. Behind them, rows of survivors, family members, reporters, and supporters lined the benches. Judge Marisol Pena, now visibly aged by the months-long trial, called the room to order. "This courtroom has heard enough," she began. "Now it's time to speak with action." The prosecution asked for the maximum. They cited the pattern of abuse, the manipulation, the psychological warfare. "He built a kingdom of silence," the lead prosecutor said. "He ruled it through fear, and he believed he'd never fall." The defense asked for leniency. Stern pointed to Diddy's philanthropy, his family, his legacy in music. He mentioned mental health, the toll of fame, and a media ecosystem bent on destruction. But the room wasn't moved. The judge took a moment. Then she spoke. "Sean Combs, you weaponized your power. You silenced victims. You erased boundaries. You danced in the shadows while the world celebrated your light." A hush fell. "I hereby sentence you to 18 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole." Gasped. A single scream in the gallery. Diddy didn't flinch. He stood, nodded at the judge, and was escorted out in handcuffs. News alerts flooded phones within minutes. Diddy sentenced. The mogul falls. Justice at last. 18 years for a lifetime of abuse. The public response was immediate and divided. Some cheered. Others called it a witch hunt. Comment sections exploded. TikTokers reacted live. Survivors across the globe used the moment to share their own truths. "I believe them," one post read. "And I believe this is just the beginning." Behind bars, Diddy's world shrank. He was housed in a medium-security federal facility in New Jersey. No cell phones, no VIP treatment. His lawyers filed appeals, but none held. He spent his days reading legal briefs, writing in a journal, and occasionally attending group counseling. In one session, he reportedly said, "I was the culture. Then I became the cautionary tale." He refused media interviews. For over a year, his only public statements came through attorneys. But his silence didn't stop the story. The music industry felt the quake. Radio stations stopped playing his tracks. Grammys revoked past honors. Documentary crews unearthed more footage. Civil lawsuits followed. His business ventures crumbled. His properties were sold off. A foundation he'd once funded was rebranded to remove his name. Yet his name lingered, etched into every timeline, every stream, every conversation. He was no longer an icon. He was a symbol. For the survivors, healing was a long road. Some found closure in his sentencing. Others said justice didn't erase the damage. "I still carry the nightmares," said Jane Doe number 2. "But I also carry something else, the truth. And he can't take that from me." Advocacy groups used the trial's momentum to push for stronger protections against powerful abusers. Congress debated legislation around non-disclosure agreements and coercive control. Law schools added the Diddy case to their ethics curriculum. Change, however small, had begun. 1 year later, a major streaming platform released a 6-part documentary titled The Rise and Reckoning of Sean Combs. It featured never-before-seen footage, anonymous testimonies, and chilling audio recordings. The final episode ended not with a fade to black, but with text. "Believe survivors. Power protects predators until it doesn't." It became the most-watched true crime docuseries of the year. In 2039, after 14 years served, Diddy became eligible for parole. His hearing was broadcast live. He read from a statement, "I was blinded by power. I hurt people, and I carry that shame with me every day." But the parole board denied his release. The decision was unanimous. Now, years later, the Diddy trial is considered a turning point. A moment when fame stopped being a shield, when voices broke through silence, when justice didn't bow to celebrity. And for those who lived it, the survivors, the witnesses, the jurors, it was never just a story. It was survival, truth, and finally, accountability. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.